On the coldest night Wyoming had seen in a decade, the wind slashed across the open plains like a living creature, howling through the wooden beams of the old Cheyenne train station, where a handful of travelers huddled together, waiting for the delayed midnight train. But none stood out more than the quiet, shivering woman on the far bench, whose thin nurse scrubs were no match for the storm raging outside, and whose face, pale with exhaustion, trembled each time a gust of icy wind forced its way through the broken window behind her. She clutched a small duffel bag to her chest, as though the entire weight of her life's struggles were packed inside it, unaware that just a few feet away stood the man fate had been preparing for her since the moment she was born. Colton Hayes, the elusive millionaire cowboy known across 3 states for owning half the cattle ranches between Douglas and Laramie, but also known, in whispered conversations and rural legends, for his stubborn refusal to fall in love after losing his parents in a ranch fire years earlier, a tragedy that left him soaked in guilt and determined never to let another person close enough to break his heart. He had stopped by E Station only because one of his ranch hands needed a midnight pickup. But as he scanned the station, his eyes locked on the freezing nurse, and something inside him, something buried deep beneath years of hardened solitude, shifted. He watched as she rubbed her arms, her teeth chattering violently while the station attendant announced another delay, and though dozens of people were present, it felt as though she were surrounded by a force that separated her from everyone else, a quiet loneliness that matched the kind he carried in his own chest. Without thinking, Colton walked toward her, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor, and the woman, startled, looked up with eyes that seemed far too gentle for someone battling such cold, and in his deep, weathered voice he asked, "Ma'am, are you all right?" A simple question, but powerful enough to make her lips twitch. As though she hadn't heard genuine concern in a long time, she tried to speak, but her voice barely formed the words, "I'm fine. Just cold." Even though her fingers had turned almost blue, Colton took off his thick ranch coat, a coat worth more than her entire bag of belongings, and wrapped it around her shoulders before E could protest, and for a moment she froze in surprise at the unexpected warmth, inhaling the soft scent of leather, pine, and smoke that clung to his jacket. "You ain't fine," he muttered gently, his cowboy hat dipped low as he studied her. "You're freezing." And she finally whispered a small thank you, so quietly the wind nearly swallowed it. Noticing her trembling hands, he crouched down beside her and saw the hospital badge clipped to her bag. Claire Whitmore, RN, and asked why a nurse was alone in scrubs at midnight in a blizzard, but Claire only stared at the floor, her voice barely audible as she explained she had lost her job that morning after refusing to stay silent about a supervisor who mistreated patients, and though she knew she'd done the right thing, it left her homeless, heartbroken, and heading to a distant town where a friend had offered her a couch for a few nights. Colton's jaw tightened with anger. Not at her, but at the injustice life kept throwing her way. Yet what struck him the most was that despite everything, she still carried a softness in her eyes, a warmth untouched by bitterness, and he asked softly, "When's this friend expecting you?" To which Claire replied with a forced smile, "She doesn't know yet. I didn't want to bother her," and hearing that, Colton couldn't help but shake his head at how someone could give so much to others, yet ask so little for herself. Outside, the snowstorms grew fiercer, and the station lights flickered as though even the building struggled to stay alive, and after another announcement informed them that the train might not come until dawn, Colton sighed, stood up, and extended his hand toward her, not as a stranger offering help to someone in need, but with the unmistakable sincerity of a man who saw a turning point in his life forming right before him, and he said, "Look, Claire, my ranch ain't far from here. It's warm, safe, and got more empty rooms than one man could ever need. You're welcome to stay the night till the storm settles." But Claire immediately shook her head, fear and pride flashing across her face as she insisted she couldn't impose on a stranger, especially one dressed like he had more money than the entire station combined. But Colton simply smiled in a way that softened the sharpness of his features, saying, "Darlin', out here we don't leave folks to freeze. And I ain't the kind of man who walks away when someone needs help." And after hesitating, Claire finally placed her cold hand into his warm palm, allowing him to guide her toward his truck parked outside, battling the fierce wind with his broad shoulders shielding her from the worst of it. The moment they stepped inside the heated cab, Claire let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. And Colton turned the heat up while he glanced at her with a mix of protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. As they drove through the pitch-black Wyoming roads, the snowflakes glimmered like tiny stars in the headlights, and Claire, exhausted beyond measure, fell asleep against the window, the hum of the engine comforting her in ways she never thought possible. Colton stole a few glances at her peaceful face, feeling something unfamiliar stirring inside him, something warm, something dangerous, something that whispered she might be the reason his life had been waiting in quiet emptiness for so long. Once they reached Hayes Ranch, a sprawling estate of barns, fences, horses, and glowing porch lamps, he carried her inside without waking her, laying her gently on the couch by the fireplace, covering her with blankets as though she were the most fragile treasure he had ever found. As the flames crackled, Claire's eyes fluttered open, and she gasped softly upon seeing him kneeling beside her, and he reassured her with a quiet, "You're safe here," before she drifted off again. That night, as the storm swallowed the world outside, Colton sat by the fire, watching over her like a silent guardian, unaware that this single act of kindness at a freezing train station would ignite a love story so powerful, so unexpected, that history itself would eventually remember the millionaire cowboy and the nurse whose frozen hands he warmed back to life. And little did they know that fate had only just begun to weave their destinies together, for the storm outside was nothing compared to the emotional storm that would soon reshape both of their lives forever. So viewers, if you're reading this captivating journey so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because Chapter 2 will take you deeper into the heart-shaking, life-changing love story that made headlines across America. By the time the storm broke the next morning, the first rays of sunlight slipped gently through the wide ranch windows and spilled over Claire's sleeping form as she lay curled under the heavy blanket near the fireplace. And when she slowly opened her eyes, blinking against the soft glow, she found herself wrapped in more warmth than she'd felt in months. Physical warmth from the fire, emotional warmth from safety, and an inexplicable warmth from knowing someone had cared enough to protect her. She sat up, realizing she was still wearing Colton's oversized coat, the scent of pine wood and leather rising from the fabric, and she felt a sudden wave of gratitude and confusion because kindness like his was something she wasn't used to receiving. When she stood and peeked through the doorway into the kitchen, she saw Colton Hayes himself, the infamous millionaire cowboy rumored to be colder than the Wyoming winters, standing at the stove, flipping pancakes in a worn-out apron with an expression so unexpectedly soft it made her heart tighten. As if sensing her presence, he turned, saw her, and smiled a slow, warm smile that made him look 10 years younger and 100 times more approachable. And he said, "Mornin', Claire. I figured you might be hungry after everything last night." And though she tried to hide her embarrassment, she whispered, "I should have helped." "You didn't have to do this," but Colton chuckled and handed her a steaming mug of hot cocoa, saying, "Darlin', after what you've been through, breakfast is the least I can offer. Trust me, you're doing me a favor just by being here. This house ain't heard laughter in years," a confession that surprised her, for the ranch looked alive and thriving, but loneliness, she realized, could hide in even the biggest homes. After they finished breakfast, he gave her a slow tour of the ranch, showing her the horses, the barns, the cattle roaming the frosted fields, and Claire felt something inside her thaw as she walked beside him. Something she thought had frozen long ago, buried under exhaustion and heartbreak from months of fighting a losing battle with corrupt hospital administrators who silenced her voice. Colton listened to every detail she shared, his jaw clenching with anger and empathy, and by the time they returned to the warm house, the connection between them had deepened into something unspoken but powerful. In the days that followed, rain delays continued due to mountain snowfall, and Claire found herself staying at Hayes Ranch longer than expected, sleeping in the guest room he prepared, drinking coffee with him every morning, learning the names of his horses, watching him work with a strength and tenderness she never expected from a man known for wealth and stubbornness. She helped bandage a ranch hand's injured wrist, fed a newborn calf, and even assisted Colton in the barn the night a mare went into early labor, her medical training guiding her steady hands while he stayed by her side. Amazed by how confidently she handled every crisis each day, Colton noticed more pieces of her, the way she bit her lip when nervous, the way she talked to animals as though they understood, the way she smiled at every sunrise as if grateful for another chance at life, And Claire noticed things about him too, how he always opened doors for her, how he took off his hat whenever speaking to her, how he looked at her with a softness he didn't show anyone else, how he checked the weather every night to make sure no storm would catch her off guard again. Though their connection grew undeniable, both remained silent, afraid to ruin. What felt sacred one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, they sat on the porch in thick jackets while the horses grazed nearby, and Claire asked quietly, "Why do people say you don't believe in love?" A question Colton rarely tolerated from anyone, yet he didn't flinch when she asked. Instead, he gazed at the distant horizon and admitted, for the first time aloud, that after losing his parents in a fire he blamed himself for, he shut down emotionally, convincing himself love only led to loss. And Claire listened in silence before gently taking his hand, saying, "Love doesn't stop pain. It gives it meaning." And in that moment, Colton realized that the woman fate had led him to was not simply a nurse, not simply a stranger he helped at a train station. She was the first person who saw through him instead of around him. That night, when Claire returned to her room, her heart pounded because she knew she was falling for a man who wasn't supposed to be part of her life. A man whose world was so different from hers, she couldn't imagine fitting in, yet somehow his presence made her feel like she finally belonged somewhere, but just... As their bond began to grow stronger, a letter arrived for Claire from the Wyoming State Medical Board. An official notice that she was being called to testify against the hospital supervisor she had reported, the very one who had threatened to blacklist her if she spoke out again. Fear washed through her, and though Colton offered to come with her, she insisted she had to face it alone, afraid of dragging him into her battles. But the morning she prepared to leave, Colton walked up to her truck, placed his hat gently on her head, and said in a voice full of quiet strength, "Claire, you came into my life like a storm I didn't see coming. I ain't letting you walk into that courtroom alone." And before she could protest, he took her hand and drove with her 2 hours into the city, his presence a steady anchor. When they entered the courtroom, reporters flocked to them, cameras flashing because Colton Hayes was a recognizable name, and his appearance beside the whistleblower nurse sparked immediate headlines. During the hearing, Claire spoke bravely about the abuse she had witnessed, her voice unwavering despite her trembling hands. And when the defense attorney attempted to twist her words, Colton stood up, not as a millionaire cowboy, not as a public figure, but as a man unwilling to let her be attacked. And he calmly stated that if the board failed to protect a nurse who risked her career for the safety of patients, then they would be as guilty as the ones she exposed. The board was stunned, the crowd gasped, and someone whispered, "Their story is going to make history," because in that moment, two unlikely individuals, one who fought corruption, one who fought loneliness, stood united in a cause bigger than themselves. Claire won the case, the supervisor was suspended, and as they walked out of the building, she cried, "I!" Into Colton's chest, overwhelmed with relief, and he wrapped his arms around her tightly, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Claire. More than you'll ever know." A confession that sealed their hearts together in a bond deeper than words. They returned to the ranch as if returning home. And that night, under a sky filled with 1,000 glittering stars, Colton took her out to the barn where lanterns hung softly in the rafters and the smell of hay mixed with the night breeze, and he told her the truth he had been holding inside for days. "Claire Whitmore, you walked into my life frozen and afraid, and somehow you thawed every part of me I thought was gone. I ain't a perfect man, but if you'll stay, I promise you a love bigger than these lands." And Claire, tears shimmering in her eyes, whispered, "Colton, you saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving. I want to stay. I want us." And with those words, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that melted every fear she'd ever carried. Their love grew, their story spread. Newspapers printed their journey from a freezing train station to a courtroom victory, and within months, people across America admired the millionaire cowboy and the courageous nurse who inspired a movement of kindness, bravery, and healing. Years later, they married on the ranch, surrounded by friends, ranch hands, and the horses that had witnessed their earliest moments together, and their love story became a symbol of hope throughout Wyoming, reminding the world that destiny works in mysterious ways, often beginning in the coldest, darkest places, but leading to the warmest, most unforgettable endings. And to everyone watching, If you want more stories like this, touching, breathtaking, and unforgettable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because your support helps these beautiful tales continue bringing warmth to hearts all around the world.